But first, it was always going to end in tears, wasn't it? I mean, you've got to wonder if anyone's got any political memory or judgment inside the New South Wales Parliamentary Liberal Party. After all, this was a bloke who came a cropper when he tried to ram Kevin Rudd's emissions trading scheme through his own party room back in 2009 and lost the Liberal leadership because of it. He then crossed the floor, let's not forget that, crossed the floor as a backbencher in exile to vote with the Labor Party and support Rudd's ETS, a policy so bad that it failed in the Senate. Let's not forget either, because the Greens, not even the Greens could back it. Now, after John Howard convinced him to stay in the Parliament, Malcolm Turnbull, well, he spent years undermining the leader that replaced him in Tony Abbott. Even with the coalition's landslide mandate in 2013 to scrap the carbon tax, Turnbull was a very reluctant vote. He never really accepted that the Australian electorate wasn't as green as he was, that while they wanted to do the right thing by the environment, and they should, they also value the economy and jobs for them and their children too. When he finally managed to seize Abbott's job, Turnbull's thumping 14-seat loss at his one and only election as Prime Minister says clearly as anything could, the Australian public had worked this man out and they didn't like what they saw. So fast forward to now. How does a bloke with that sort of record, who spent much of his time out of office belching bile and venom at his former colleagues, how does he end up not just with a new gig courtesy of the New South Wales taxpayer, but an appointment to a post that was always going to bring him into direct conflict with the Prime Minister that replaced him in an area of policy where not only does Turnbull have form, but it's an area that's caused huge fractures on the centre-right of politics for almost 2 decades. How did that happen? How did he get that gig in that policy area? We know that the minister who put him up, Minister Kean, is a Turnbull apologist. Where was the judgment of all the other cabinet ministers who let this appointment get rubber stamped, and the Premier too, other than the two we're told who opposed it, reportedly, Anthony Roberts and David Elliott, when blind Freddie could have told them that the Liberal base would erupt? Boy, oh boy, didn't they erupt. If nothing else, the Liberal base in New South Wales has reminded a few of those MPs sitting in Macquarie Street that they are only there because of their support. And they're saying, don't take that support for granted. But heck, don't take my word for it. Here's just some of the hundreds and hundreds of reactions today, straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. In the Australian newspaper, Kevin rightly says, Turnbull blames the right-wing media. The truth is that the membership of the Liberal Party went ballistic. You can only poke the members in the eye for so long. And Tim writes, pity the LNP didn't do this the first time Mr Turnbull knocked on the door and asked to come in. David says MT always seems unable to accept any other position than that benefits himself, and if he doesn't get his own way, continually undermines the successful position. And this from Stevie. Sky News reported not so long ago that Malcolm Turnbull deliberately tried to stymie the appointment of Matthias Cormann to his OECD post. Now his own appointment has been vetoed. What an irony. We reported it. That was an Australian Financial Review story. That was their exclusive as well. Now, of course, once the dumping of Turnbull was made public early this morning, the former Prime Minister, well, he was straight out of the blocks, straight there on ABC radio, of course, declaring it all part of a vast News Corp vendetta.
There has been nothing short of a, pretty ferocious campaign, a vendetta really, in the characteristic way that News Corp operates. And its goal was to bully the state government into not appointing me chair of this net zero board. They've been successful.
Well, lest he thinks it's just readers of News Corp's Australian newspaper who saw through him, here's a few comments from the Sydney Morning Herald too, where he might have thought he'd have some mates. Sorry, Malcolm, if you want mates, you're going to have to get a dog. D. Lee says the miserable ghost needs to go away. Beamer writes, here we go again. Poor Malcolm being persecuted by the Murdoch media. He really knows how to play the victim. Robbo had this to say, and I reckon there are many with him. They sacked him. What great news. What they need to do now is sack the dill who put him up for the job. Well, this too from Graham. It would be untenable to have a miserable ghost using a public position to make political attacks on his enemies real and imagined. As always, Mr Turnbull is unable to see other points of view. And Sellers, well, she got it in one. Don't you love karma? The man who uses the media to destroy careers and snipe at his enemies, getting a dose of his own medicine. Absolute poetry. Even on the ABC's Facebook page, the former PM failed to find a friend, even though, of course, he was once the leather jacket darling of Q&A. Said Mark, Turnbull is a self-centred failed PM who should never have been in the Liberal Party with his beliefs. Well, Gary nailed it, saying Turnbull and Rudd, he said, are the worst PMs this nation has had. The less we hear from either is a good thing. And here he was, poor old Malcolm, thinking it was all just a Murdoch media conspiracy. I'm sorry to have to tell him, but the ordinary Australian is a whole lot smarter than Malcolm Turnbull ever gave them credit for being. And boy, haven't the ordinary Australians worked him out.